Well, welcome to the Healthy Christian Leaders Show. I'm Dwight Habermel, your host today. And I have a guest, Danny Smith, Dr. Danny Smith, down from Middleton, who is not only our guest today, but has been a founding part of the Aaron Ministry Network, a partner in crime, if you will, right from the day we started the network. And the crime of encouraging leaders. And Danny, thank you for taking time today. And we're going to be talking about conflict in local churches. And it's an inevitable thing that happens when you bring human beings together. It doesn't matter whether it's the local church or whether it's business or whether it's family. Conflict happens in all kinds of situations. But you know, it has its unique challenges in church. You've, I'm sure, had conflict that you've had to lead through in local church ministry. You've been 20 years now,
23 years.
23 years down in Middleton.
Yeah.
What do you think seems to be often the real cause of conflict beyond the topic that might be disputed or discussed in a given situation?
Yeah, I would say, a couple things. First of all, I think in the church context, the recognition that we are in the midst of a spiritual battle, that, we do have an enemy who is bent on disrupting and even destroying the Church of Jesus Christ. And part of his schemes is, to bring about disunity in the church. Jesus prayed that the church would be one, and you can guarantee that our enemy is actively trying to make sure that that prayer does not actually come to fruition. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing goes back to, something that you talked about in your opening remarks. I mean, it is this side of heaven, you are going to have conflict.
Yeah.
And I think as pastors, that can be difficult to wrap our minds around, because we think, if we lead well, if we, are spiritual enough, if we pray enough, if we do all the right things, then conflict shouldn't be a part of our experience. And that's just not true. Even just looking through, the New Testament, Jesus encountered conflict. There was conflict between his disciples, on into the book of Acts, Paul and Barnabas get into conflict over, John Mark. Most of the New Testament letters are Paul and some of the other apostles writing to address conflict in the local church. So it's there. It's part of who we are. What surprises me, I will say, is that when it comes to the church, that there's not more conflict. I think, the church is one of the most unique organisms that I could think of on the earth, where, somehow God thought it was a great idea to take, male and female and people of different ages and different ethnicities and different social economic backgrounds and, different life experiences, and throw them all together into this thing called church. And say, now you figure out how to love one another, you figure out how to make this work. And so when you have those dynamics at play, there is going to be conflict in learning how to be community together and love one another the way that Jesus expects us to.
And I would imagine that, part of the thing that comes into play as well is even just managing people's expectations, because they have expectations that are really very, very different.
Sure.
And often when people have their expectations not met, they struggle with that.
Yeah. Expectations, of you as a leader, but also expectations of one another.
Right.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it.
How have you learned to love and lead those that deeply disagree with you?
Yeah, I would say that's been a journey for me. I am not somebody that naturally gravitates towards conflict, and some people, just because of their makeup, are able to thrive in the midst of conflict, are able to just kind of take it as a inevitable part of life, and kind of deal with it. And that's not how I'm made. So that's been a very difficult part of pastoral ministry for me, especially at the beginning. I came into a church that was still, I would say it was still relatively healthy, but was probably on the start of decline. And so we needed to start to make some changes in the life of the church. And inevitably, when you start making change, conflict starts to arrive. And I, as a young leader, that was the most difficult part for me. Experiencing, backlash from people that I had started to look up to as followers of Jesus, as people who I would consider to be friends, and I mean, you can talk to my wife. There were days when I would come home from being at the office and I'd just lay on the couch, and she'd want to know what was wrong, and I would explain the situation. I was just so down in the dumps because that's not what I expected ministry to be like. And so, God by His grace, I was able to pour out those things before the Lord in prayer, and take those people and those situations to the Lord, and just little by little, year by year, the skin gets a little bit thicker.
Yeah.
And so I look back now, and I still don't like conflict, but I look back and I think, the things that would have really shook me up 23 years ago are like things that are just run of the mill today,
Right.
because you build resilience. You see that that thing that you thought you imagine in your mind, this thing is gonna be the thing that ends ministry for you, and the church is gonna fall to pieces and people are gonna hate you. No, that was just a very minor little blip on the radar, and so you grow into that. And I don't know. I look back and I think, what could have helped me in those moments, and I just think nothing. Like, I had to experience it. I had to go through it. I had to, experience God's grace in the middle of it. I had to have other people come alongside of me and speak encouragement in the middle of that. And that's how I grew in the midst of conflict. And the loving piece, again, I mean, you grow into that. Nobody likes to experience conflict or backlash from somebody else, or some of the hurtful things that are sometimes said. But I guess what really helped me in the midst of that is just being reminded again and again and again of the example of our Lord, that He has called me to serve His church. He died on the cross for His church. That is the extent of Christ's love for His church, and He's called me to love His church as He has loved the church. And so I just have to keep coming back to the example of the Lord, and asking Him to give me grace, asking Him to help me to love this person as He loves that person, asking Him to help me to see that person through His eyes. And He does. You know, it's a process. Like it's not automatic, but he does.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember years ago going through a difficult leadership situation and going out to the beach in the early morning in just time to be alone. I drove out to Lawrencetown, sat there by the water, and I remember hearing God whisper, you know, they hurt me too. And yeah, you're right. Now, Danny, I've always seen you as a fairly courageous person, even though, you know, it has not been easy to deal with conflict in your younger days. Like, I have had the privilege of knowing you for many years, and I remember you boldly standing up in the congregation with the word and declaring some things that were, you know, full of grace, full of love, and yet full of powerful truth that took an enormous amount of courage. So you had courage, yet conflict was not easy. How does that work?
Yeah, I guess something I learned very, very early on is that small fires become big fires. And so much better, like it's painful either way. Conflict is painful. Yeah. At least for me, it's painful. It's less painful when the fire is small than when the fire is big.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I force myself to jump in when it's a little issue and deal with the little issue. And most of the time I find, you know, the little issue resolves fairly easily before it burns out of control. And you've got, you know, people and personalities all jumping on board, and it just gets out of control.
That's such a great lesson. It really is. I've observed that in my own leadership journey. If you don't, it's like the little foxes spoil the vine. Well, those little foxes become grizzly bears.
They do.
if they're unattended to, really. So, but I don't think being courageous is really the absence of negative emotions or trepidation as we approach a challenge. Courage is really the willingness to set that aside and step up to the plate.
Yeah.
Well, if courage is needed and it's not always innate, but we kind of step up to the plate despite the emotions we feel, how is courage developed in our lives?
I think that there's only one way that it's developed. And I think that is by taking these steps of faith, one after another, that, you know, after prayer, after, you know, seeking the Lord, you know, this is the step that the Lord is calling you to take, and take it. You know, take that step of obedience, even if it's in a small thing, because you're going to need all those little small steps of obedience when it comes to taking a big one. And so I think it's part of, you know, training yourself. It's part of discipline as a follower of Jesus that, you know, whenever you have an opportunity to exercise obedience, you do it. And then when you need to draw deeper on those reserves, you've built that up inside of you so that you can take that giant leap sometimes that you might need to take.
So it's like lifting weights.
I think so, yeah.
Start with a 5 pound, then a 10 pound, and so on and so forth. Well, we're going to be back in just a few moments. We're going to take a break in our conversation together on conflict. We'll see you in a few moments in the Healthy Christian Leader. Well, today's conversation was fantastic, but we're not finished yet. We'll be back in the next video with the same guest with more discussion about leader health. You know the drill. Subscribe and hit that bell. Would you join us for the next episode? You can find new episodes every week in video form on the Aaron Ministry YouTube page and in audio form as the Healthy Christian Leader Show wherever you get your podcasts. Aaron Ministries is an interdenominational network of friends in ministry with a mission to foster healthy Christian leaders. check out our website, aaronministries.com, for more resources and information on how to donate or to start a healthy Christian leader gathering in your area. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.